Can we start? Are we ready? Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Javier, as many of you already know. I am a member of the soil engineering team, and it's always good to see again old friends and meet also new friends in this conference. So thank you so much to Christian and the team to make this possible. My talk today is about maybe everything related with signing macOS apps with Soyo, and a brief overview of Apple history about their security technologies and everything that involves being able to execute your apps, signing your apps, and distribute your apps, and how Soyo helps you in doing all that. As any tale, we start with once upon a time in the happy days of macOS, everything we needed to do was clicking the build button, zip it, the file, or just create a DMG image, put it on our website so users just can download, move to the applications folder, and execute. No problems, everything run. So far, so good. But today, it looks more like this. Kind of intimidating, isn't it? So let's see what's going on here. Everything starts, if I can move this, so you can look better to it, with macOS signing. What that means, that you need to put some data in the developer's ID field on the Soyo IDE. What is the developer ID field, or what it expects? It expects data from your developer certificate. What developer certificate you need to use in order to distribute your apps? Well, it depends. If you decide not to be a member of the Apple Developer Program, then you don't need to put any data at all in that field. What means that your app is going to be adult signed. No developer information, just transparent to the macOS operating system. What means that you will be able to execute the app on your computer. But if you try to distribute that app to other users, they won't be able to execute the application because the security measures from the macOS operating system just kick in and will stop that. Also implies that ad hoc signed apps cannot use some of the Apple technologies. For example, they are sandbox restricted. This is a technology from Apple that includes your app on its own container, so it cannot harm other apps, keeps the data from the user secure. It's not possible to apply hardened runtime, and that is not good because that means that other apps can inject malicious code in your app while it is executing, including loading some libraries or wherever. Of course, you can't do notarization, what is a requirement to send your apps to the Mac App Store in order to be available to other users, so they can buy your app or whatever. They only can use free entitlements. Don't afraid about that. We will see a bit later what that means. And they won't be able to use provisioning profiles. Provisioning profiles and entitlements are somehow related each other. Of course, if you choose this path, Gatekeeper will kick in and will disallow executing your app on other computers. And of course, you won't be able to distribute your app on the Mac App Store. Okay, but because I am a member of the Apple Developer Program, I can use the Apple Development Certificate. What this means, what can I do with my app in this case? You can apply sandboxing, you can apply hardening runtime on build from the SOYO perspective. When you are debugging your apps, you won't be able to apply hardening runtime. You won't be able to apply notarization, but you will be able to apply entitlements and also development provisioning profiles. That means that if your app, your macOS app, is using some Apple technologies that require entitlements and provisioning profiles, you will be able to do this kind of distribution. In this case, because you are using development certificate, you won't be able to distribute the app to other users, and of course, you won't be able to publish that build to the Mac App Store. So, third path, using your developer IDE application. This is the one that you will be using when distributing your apps to other users outside the Mac App Store. In this case, you can apply to the build all the stuff provided by Apple. Sandboxing, hardened runtime, notarize your application, and also use entitlements and distribution profile that is not the same that is going to be used when you are developing and debugging your app, even if they are using the same Apple technologies as access to iCloud, Keychain, or in-app purchases, things like that. In this case, Gatekeeper will not complain if you decide to notarize the app, but you won't be able to distribute this kind of build through the Mac App Store. The only way to make your macOS app available in the Mac App Store is using the Apple Distribution Certificate. In this case, when you submit your app for Apple approval, sandboxing is required. Hardened runtime is not applied, but is very recommended to enable also. Hardened runtime doesn't require notarization. In fact, you can do notarization on builds intended to be submitted to the Mac App Store. And of course, you will need to apply entitlements and also distribution profiles. Gatekeeper will be fine with that, allowing your app to be executed on any Mac that has installed the app, and you can submit this kind of build to the Mac App Store. But let's see a bit of Apple security technologies and how we arrived to this mess. Believe it or not, everything started with iPhone. This is a short timeline. Back in 2006, Apple did announce at the developers conference code signing for macOS apps. This is not something that Apple did invented. In fact, it was possible to sign macOS apps previously using your own certificates. But Apple started enforce this just because on 2007 they announced the iPhone, and apps installed in the iPhone require to be signed. So why not unify all the platforms and also start requiring it for macOS? At that time, it was not mandatory at all, and in fact, you can create builds not signed at all that were running just fine on any Mac's release. At that point, when the iPhone was introduced, they also announced something called Sealbelt, that is sandboxing, just because they needed it for Mac, for apps installed in the iPhone. Sandboxing is the container where the app is installed, so it cannot access resources outside its own container. So they translated the same idea to macOS apps. Then, when the iOS App Store was announced 1 year later, was when Apple did introduce provisioning profiles. Provisioning profiles are kind of certificates signed by Apple that allows any given app to use Apple technologies like iCloud, Keychain, groups, and in-app purchases, and that kind of stuff. Then, on 2011, the Mac App Store disappeared, so app sandboxing became a formal requirement for apps submitted to the Mac App Store. It still was possible to distribute your apps without signing. And also, provisioning profiles started to be relevant for apps distributed through the Mac App Store. 1 year later, Apple enforced that all apps submitted to the Mac App Store had to be sandboxed. It was the first serious requirement in that regard. Also, entitlements were mandatory for apps sent to the Mac App Store, not for apps that were distributed directly to anyone through your website, site, or any other mean. And provisioning profiles became widely adopted. And this little guy on top of the pile is a gatekeeper, and it started with macOS Mountain Lion. That one, as its own name implies, is the technology that is looking at your app bundle when it's installed in your Mac. It looks into the bundle to see if it has been signed. If it has been signed, it compares that the developer is a well-known developer, no files have been modified, and everything looks okay. If everything is okay, it allows to execute the app. Other technologies and changes come into the way through the years, and this is my favorite one because Gatekeeper started to do the check-ins using a local database that Apple was updating every 2 weeks or so. But then they decide to move that kind of check-in online. And on 2020, something really funny happened, because in doing that online check-ins, Apple was transmitting all the information in clear form. So it was a massive fail, and hackers got into it, and it allowed to install and run on users' computers apps that even if they not were signed with proper certificates, were able to run surpassing Gatekeeper. And along the years, things got more and more restrictive until Sequoia. At this point is when things got really serious, because on previous macOS releases, the operating system still allowed users to run apps that were not signed, that were not properly distributed through the Mac App Store. But at this point, they enforced Gatekeeper. So apps distributed that were not notarized just stopped to run. And with Tahoe, things are getting worse. They are restricting more and more and enforcing macOS developers to be members of the Apple Developer Program, sign their apps with the appropriate certificates, and notarize the apps. So when you distribute your app, it can be installed and run from anyone's computer. Of course, along the years, we at Soyo, we were introducing features to make all this more easier for our users. And now, let's see the next thing that are the main pieces of that puzzle that we did see previously. We need to handle certificates. We need to decide if we want our app to be sandboxed or not, depending if we want to make a direct distribution or send the app to the Mac App Store, if we want to apply hardened runtime or not, and notarize it, apply entitlements and related provisioning profiles, depending if our apps are making use of some of the Apple services or technologies that require that kind of files. Why is everything this required? For direct distribution, for Mac App Store distribution, and even if you want to debug your apps from the Soyo IDE with the same set of features that the user is going to experience once you distribute your apps. The main goals surpass, the first one is just surpass gatekeeper barrier, what requires notarization. Keep user privacy, not just for sensitive data, but also when the user or your app needs to access some hardware resources, as the camera, for example, certain folders, and such. In that case, you apply or may apply sandboxing and also hardened runtime to protect the app itself against code injections at runtime. Of course, app security that is provided by hardened runtime and being able to publish your app through the Mac App Store. At the center of everything this are the developer certificates, and that means being member of the Apple Developer Program, paying near $100 per year. And you get the developer certificates that allows you to do everything that. There is no other way. So when you are a member of the Apple Developer Program, at least you have to install in your computer through keychains, using Xcode, the whatever option you choose, but at least the Apple Development Certificate, the Developer ID Application Certificate, and the Apple distribution certificate. Of course, for your own apps that are meant to be run just on your computer, you can continue to use other sign-in that is not signing at all. Apple Development Certificate is just when you want to build and debug apps in the IDE, taking or getting the same experience the user will have when that app is distributed. Developer ID application is the one you have to use when doing direct distribution, for example, in your company, to all computers, Mac computers in your company. And Apple distribution is the certificate to be used in case you want to distribute your app through the Mac App Store. And of course, if you want to use the publish button from the Sojo IDE to send your app to the Mac App Store for a review, approval, and make it available finally on the Mac App Store, you need to have installed the third-party Mac developer installer, because that is the certificate we are using when the bundle is packaged and sent to Mac App Store Connect website. That package needs to be signed using that certificate. On previous Sojo releases, we managed everything this through the developer ID field, but we found that mostly when it's about new users arriving to the Mac developing side of things and knowing anything about certificates or what they are, they needed to move to the keychain access app, find their certificates, figure out which one they needed, figure out what data was expected, copy that data, move back to the Sojo ID, and paste it for the developer ID. Then they had to repeat this same operation between if the development cycle they were developing the app, but then they decide just, is everything okay? And let's create a build to distribute the app. They had to repeat this. And if they want also send the same app to the Mac App Store, way back to the keychain access, find the right certificate, copy the data, and paste it on the developer ID field. Main downsides, mainly for new users, no queue about the expected data on that field, no relationship between the certificate they need to use and the kind of distribution they want to make. When the app was debugged from the IDE, was always adult signed, what meant that they had not the same experience debugging the app that when the app was finally installed on the user computer, especially if they needed to use entailments, provisioning profiles, or even sandboxing, because the container restricts the access to folders, while on debugging, you can access any folder you want. Starting with 2026 R1 release, we reworked everything this, so now we collect all the certificates that are installed in the computer, create teams around that found certificates, so you only need to choose the team you want to use to sync your apps. And when you choose the team, we detect the distribution certificates or build that you can accomplish using that install or detected certificates for a given team. So in case you have all the required certificates, you can choose simply for development, for the direct distribution, or for submitting to the App Store. That is it. No more figuring out what certificate I have to choose, what data I need to copy and paste in the developer ID field, and also when you choose the certificate and debug your apps, it will offer a closer experience that the user will have once he installs the app on his computer. Of course, in this case, entitlements will be applied and also provisioning profiles. Even more, that same menu offers the certificates inspector window. So you don't need to go to keychain access to see why you don't have the option to send your app to the Mac App Store or to create a build intended for direct distribution. It shows you what certificates are on your computer, which ones are just expired or missing, and if you click on any of those certificates in the lower area, it will offer you information for what that given certificate is and how we'll use it. And in the case of certificates that have problems, we offer the fix button or advice button so you can get a step-by-step guidance on how to solve the issue. Well, let's look at some of that sandboxing or Apple technologies related with security. Sandboxing is optional for direct distribution, so you don't need to apply sandboxing to every app you want to distribute to everyone. Even for some kind of apps, is not recommended at all if you need to access some underlying resources on the operating system or other hardware without restrictions. Hardened runtime is nearly mandatory for direct distribution, very visible for Mac App Store distribution, even if Apple still doesn't require it, but it's very probable that it starts requiring it. In fact, there is some issues with apps installed from the Mac App Store that have not hardened runtime enabled, because even in that case, code can be injected and can be mangled in some ways. So it's preferable to apply hardened runtime to those apps you intend to make available through the Mac App Store. What about notarization? Mandatory for direct distribution, because if not, Gatekeeper will complain, will not let your users to execute the app. Requires hardened runtime, and from the IDE perspective, we don't apply that when you are debugging, just because if you enable hardened runtime, we cannot attach the debugger to it. What are entitlements? Well, I prepared a good definition: key value pairs that grant an executable permission to use a service of technology from Apple. It's kind of a list, XML file with entries about, I want to use the camera and the description because my app needs to take photos from my users or wherever, that kind of entries. There are two kinds of entitlement entries. Ones that are considered free, and in this case, free means that doesn't require a paid-in provisioning profile. And those free entries are those from enable sandboxing, enabling hardened runtime, plus con Apple Security Get Us Allow, that allows other apps, as for example instruments, to attach your app while it is debugging, so you can see if it is leaking memory or other issues. And there are non-free or restricted entitlements that are those that are required to put in that file if your app requires to use Apple services or technologies. In this case, all the entries put in the entitlement file needs to be or have its pair on the provisioning profile. But not all the entries in the provisioning profile has to be the corresponding entry in the entitlement file. When it's about entitlements publishing to Mac App Store, they are mandatory even if you don't use Apple technologies or services, just because it requires two mandatory entries, count.apple.application identifier and count.apple.developer.team identifier. What about provisioning profiles? Is the other side of entitlements. A digital file signed by Apple that authorizes a specific application to run on designated Mac computers, blah, 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 blah. It's quite the same. If you are going to use in your app some Apple services or technologies, you need to go to the Apple Developer Program website and create the provisioning profile there. Download it and attach it or just copy it to your app, so when it is signed, both entitlements and pairing provisioning profile are included as part of the executable, signed executable. So when it is installed and Gatekeeper kicks in, it checks everything, sees that everything is okay, and allows your app to use that services. Again, you can create two kinds of provisioning profiles. For development, the provisioning profile that you are going to use with your development certificate, so you can debug that features in the Soyo IDE debugger. And when your app is ready for distribution, you create the distribution provisioning profile and attach it on the build process. How does Soyo help with everything this? Along the years, we have been adding features to the IDE to help you to handle everything this. So if you enable, for example, sandboxing, you can access an editor that's simply checking the checkboxes. You enable the features your app is going to need from the sandboxing point of view, and we take care of everything, creating the entitlements file, attaching it when we sign the app, and it will be okay and ready for distribution. This is the same for hardened runtime. You only need to check the checkboxes, and even in this case, because some of the entries in the hardened runtime editor are paired with sandboxing, if you enable both things, sandboxing and hardened runtime, when you check, for example, camera and the hardened runtime, that same entry is going to be checked for you on the sandboxing editor. Of course, when it's about notarizing your app, we also offer an editor, so you can put there the app-specific password that we need to send the package to the notarization servers from the Apple side and receive the answer, so the app is keep notarized.
Javier, one question. If you could go one slide back. Would it be a good idea to have a help box or something?
Oh, if you put the pointer cursor over any of these entries, you get
Okay.
the help. So for example, this is intended for blah, 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 blah.
And Javier, the app-specific password is something you assign on Apple's website?
Yeah, and that is common for any app out here that needs an app-specific password. There is no other way to create that kind of passwords. You have to go to Apple ID website, introduce some tag for the password you are creating, so you know this password is specific for Soyo, for notarization, wherever you name it. You create the password, copy it, paste it in the window, and everything is done. And also we offer, because some users handle several teams, so we offer the option to create one specific password that is going to be used globally. And if, for example, you are creating a project that is intended to be notarized and signed using your app ID for other team, you have the certificates for it, then you select on setup per project instead of global, and it will be saved with that project. So it will be notarized using that specific team credentials. For user entitlements, in addition to the ones we create for you automatically based on your decisions for sandboxing, hardened runtime, and others that we handle internally, you can provide your own entitlements file. And even if you need to provide some more entries in the generated list file, you have a property list editor where you can create everything you need. And that will be combined with the list that is created. And even if you come from really old projects where the added list file was added to the navigator, we combine all that. Of course, discard duplicate entries and give preferences to the ones you put using the property list editor instead of those that are also present in an external file that you drop it into the navigator. So let's do demo time. As Jeff told to us yesterday, it's good to be a member of the Soyo team because you have access to some internal builds. So this thing I'm going to show it to you today uses entitlements, also uses a provisioning profile, because this app is going to create a password entry in the iCloud keychain. And that means using one of the Apple-provided services or technologies that are not free entitlement, but requires a provisioning profile. But before running it, let's take a look at the new developer ID. As you can see here, it detects my team, but I have also certificates, development certificates for other teams, including Soyo, my good friend and teammate, Ricardo. And in this case, the detected certificates allows me to create signed apps for development, for data distribution, for App Store. And in fact, if I choose App Store, you can see here how the Publish button is enabled. But if I choose, for example, in this case, Ricardo, I have only the possibility to do direct distribution based on the certificates that I have installed. And I may ask, why just direct distribution and I'm not allowed to do development signing or App Store signing? So if I go to the inspector, teams, in this case, Ricardo, oh, I can see here that these three required certificates are not installed. If I click the one for Apple development, I can see that this certificate is missing from the keychain or as expired. This certificate is required for signing and running apps on your local machine during the development phase or cycle. Distribution, the same information, and also for third-party Mac developer installer for that particular team. So in this case, Apple development, let's get some advice. Missing certificate, and it gives me some advices about how to fix the problem. But because it's difficult to fix a problem while you have on this window, you can save that information to a PDF so you can access to it any time you want in order to solve the issues. In other cases, for example, let's select my team. I have all the required certificates that allows me to do the three kinds of distributions, but I can see here that I have two certificates that are duplicated and in fact are expired. For example, this one, Apple development, so in this case, fix. Expired certificates stored in the keychain have no use and can be deleted. Okay. Deleted without needing to go to the keychain and trying to find it or wherever. So if I select my team again, the certificate went away, is cleaned. So I can keep my keychain clean from expired certificates. Let's do the same for this one. And all of this directly from the IDE without needing to go to keychain access or messing with that. So as I told you, sandboxing, if I want to apply sandboxing to this particular app, it's just a matter of enable the switch, going to edit, and check the boxes that I'm going to need. I'm going to access for read and write any folder the user may select, and that's fine. Not going to save that. And the same for hardened runtime. As you can see, that explains your question. You can see any of the entries has the help, so it allows you to know for what kind of a specific feature is that entry. The app itself is quite simple. It creates a password on iCloud, and because we want you to get the same user experience while debugging that the user is going to have once you distribute your app, if I run the app, we can see how that one password is created under iCloud Kitchen, retrieve the information, update the information, and delete it. And this is possible because even while debugging the app in the Sojo IDE, the provisioning profile and entitlements are applied, something that was not possible in previous releases. And even more, if I go to instruments, for example, and choose the app, start tracking it for memory leaks, I can see if my app, while debugging, is leaking memory. We can see here. So having this kind of information helps us even more to improve the app before it is distributed.
What is this for?
Instruments, it is included with Xcode. You go to Xcode, sitting here.
Thank you.
And it's a good one companion to track things that we don't support yet on our own debugger while the app is running. Let's stop this. Let's stop this. And let's try now the kind of things you should not try in a demo. We change to the direct distribution and build the app so it is notarized. Uploading the app to the Apple servers for notarization. And it depends on the Wi-Fi speed, the Apple speed in things, that everything works well. So let's see how it goes. Oh, and here it is. The app is already notarized, and in fact, this is an app I strongly recommend for everyone because it provides a lot of information that help you to know or solve some issues related with signing, profiles, and entitlements. We can see here that hardening is enabled, notarization is granted with a notarized developer ID, that is me, of course, and also can see that some entitlements have been applied. The one required to access the iCloud keychain, and the one specifying the ID for this app in particular. So it's a good one too. And in this case, this is the important thing. Gatekeeper enable allows to execute this app when it is distributed. So white flag and everything is set. About resources, Apparency is the app I just showed you. It's very recommended to deal with sign-in issues you might find. Archaeology is from the same developers, and it gets at a deeper level. even to access the CMS message from the sign-in in the bundle and other specifics related with signing and provisioning profiles, and even the services used while signing, so it's quite useful. As you can see here, it allows you, if the certificate used to sign the app complies or meets the specific requirements. If you want to get more information or are interested in everything related with MacOS signing in a more deepest level, I recommend the series of blog posts that we published. And also in the documentation, we have a step-by-step guide about everything you need in order to get your Mac and iOS apps sent to the Mac and App Store. Step by step, from installing certificates, handling everything from the Soyo IDE side, and when you click the publish button, what you need to do from the Apple developer website and the App Store Connect website. So, questions?
Can you talk about what for someone that's never done any of this before, what's the experience like of, you go to the Apple's developer website, and what do? You create an application, a record that kind of matches the application?
Yeah.
And then you give it a password, and you
Oh,
download
if you want to publish an app to the Mac App Store, you need to go both portals, because on the App Store Connect, you create the record for the app. So you get a unique ID that is going to be used by that particular app. So it relates with the information you send when you build the app and send it to review and approval. If you intend to just publish directly your MacOS app, you need to go to the Apple developer website to get, if it is required, create and download the provisioning profile, mostly.
Okay, so you download those files and where they go?
Yeah, you download that files, just copy file from the Soyo ID, so it is applied while building and signing the app.
I'm not sure if this even applies, but how does this compare with the Graffiti Suite app wrapper program? Is that the same type of thing?
With app wrapper, you mean? Well, we do mostly with app wrapper. That's, you can do that from the ID.
It used to be that we didn't.
Yeah.
And you needed app wrapper, but now the ID does pretty much what app wrapper was doing.
Yeah. Even we, as you have seen, we manage the certificates or and offer advices if something is wrong with them. So, okay, yeah. Okay, so